Science now shows us that our brain changes not only while we're young, teenagers, but basically until the day we die. The science of neuroplasticity that most of you probably have heard of basically shows us that our brain is moldable and it changes depending what we do. So our brain actually changes itself depending on what we do every day. Research done by Carol Dweck shows that when kids in school are taught neuroplasticity, and I don't mean taught the entire science of neuroplasticity, but just when they were taught that their brain will change depending on what they do every day, when they do the homework, when they're good kids and so on, it turns out that these children perform much better when they know that their brain structure will change. I do believe that this is incredible discovery, and I honestly don't understand why this is not widely known. Some of us, you certainly know, because this is your interest to learn about habits and psychology and neuroscience and happiness. But a lot of people, if they just know this fact, their kids, their family members can and will perform much better. So we will make sure and should make sure that we transfer this knowledge to people around us. You remember earlier we talked about the research from Duke University that shows that 40% of what we do is not based on our decisions, but rather on our habits. Interestingly enough, another research done by Sonia Lubomirsky shows that 40% of our happiness is actually self-controlled. It is again based on what we do. Now, in her research, which I do go much deeper in other programs in Science of Happiness Psychology, but for now, what we need to know that in her research, yes, 40% shows that 40% of our happiness is self-control. It depends on what we do every day. 50% is genetic, so it's based on our genes, right, our family members and so on. And 10% is circumstances, so the way that we grew up, where we live, and so on. So now we know that 40% of what we do, basically that our behavior can change physical structure of our brain. We know we talked earlier that when we create new habits, we create this new neural pathway in our brain. And that is, again, based on the science of neuroplasticity. Now, how does neuroplasticity relates to habits? Well, you see by now the relationship is that when we create new habits, when we develop new habits, when we change our existing habits, possibly by replacing the existing habits with new habits, which we'll talk about in a little more details later, we create this new neural pathway or we rewrite the existing pathway. And that is how neuroplasticity is connected with the habits. Neuroplasticity is really complicated research. However, its fundamental concept can be really simply explained. The best explanation I have found was put forward by neuroscientist Alvaro Pascal Leon, who says, "The brain is plastic, not elastic. An elastic band is stretched and always goes back to its original form. The plastic brain is altered by every encounter and every situation. It keeps changing." A story that I would like to share might explain habits and neuroplasticity even in a little different way. Of course, I didn't know about this when I was a kid, but now when I think back of that story and think back how habits work, I find a direct relation. So, When I was a kid, growing up in Sarajevo, Bosnia-Herzegovina, former Yugoslavia, there was this hilly street in the city. It would be closed for the traffic during the winter time, most of the winter, due to impossible driving conditions. Now, most of us kids would love to go to that street with our sled, most of them handmade. I know I had one that my grandpa made, and there are 4 kids in the family. They all used it. I was the 4th one. The sled was still there. Yes, I broke it, but that's another story. So we would go with these sleds and go on top of the hill. Actually, rather, we wouldn't go on top of the hill day one. We would go a little bit below and start building that. And I will go that in another lecture, how we build that habit of cut. So most of us kids would go with these sleds and go on top of the hill and sled down. The first time we would go down, we would end up at one place. The second time we would go down, we would end up yet at a different place. The third time we go down, we end up somewhere else. And as we kept sledding from top of the hill, going down, at some point, we would create one way, one pathway, and we would follow that established pathway. We would end up at the same place. If you ever tried sledding, maybe even skiing on a smaller scale, not on a large, terrain, then you know what I'm talking about. So if you think of habits, that's exactly how they work. So you establish one track, right? One track, and you follow that track. It takes a while to get there, but once you have that established track, it is easy. It is really easy because at some point, we would sled down with minimal or no effort at all. In the beginning, it was hard, right? But once we establish that track, once we establish that pathway, we would go down with minimum or no effort at all. It is exactly the same how habits work. It is going to be hard in the beginning, right? But as you keep doing it, you will establish that neural pathway. So it will be easier for you to get to the end, to achieve your goal, right? To achieve your goal, whatever that goal is, by following that habit, by following and going to that same neural pathway, using the same neural pathway rather, and following that same track as I did when I was a kid. And what is more even important is, now we know that our brain will change and it will help us. It will help us follow that same pathway.